Okay, well, here we are, the second It's Not Really Over panel. My name's Kenzie Dolan, and I am a certified astrologist. My company is Ruby Jade Rituals, and within Ruby Jade Rituals, I have Ruby Jade Academy, and I am housing a course that's around death, dying, grieving, and learning about the afterlife. It's called It's Not Really Over. And it's really kind of an interesting story of how I got here, but I feel like it's a very impactful story. Almost 4 years ago, in June, actually, I lost my second nephew. So this was my sister's first son, but I gained probably one of my most brilliant ideas, and that is it's not really over. Um, as you all know, and people listening, losing a loved one is really difficult, and we all deal with it differently. And before I lost Fitz, obviously, I had lost other family members, pets, friends, and I was always kind of confused with the notion in our society that, once a person passes and the services are over, a lot of the time we just stop talking about that person. And I always kind of had like an icky feeling towards that because I just felt like, one, I would want people to still talk about me if I had passed, and two, where do those people go that are struggling to keep their loved one alive for support? So the idea of it's not really over is really of being a friend to a person in the grieving journey and allowing that person to have space and to feel supported and not to feel isolated. Because when I was grieving Fitz, my nephew, it was a very isolating time for me. And I really did lose myself in the grieving journey, which can be a dangerous and scary journey, for sure. So that's the idea behind It's Not Really Over. More about myself. Um, I'm 31 years old. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. I live in New York, Brooklyn. And about 3 months after Fitz died, I decided to go back to a ritual, astrology, that I had always been interested in. But this is what I actually use to grieve. I'm not a religious person, I'm more of a spiritual person. And through my certification process, I was able to open up doors about myself, about Fitz and his soul's journey and all that stuff. So I actually was able to not only read his birth chart, but his death chart with my teacher. And it gave me a lot of closure to the event. But I also discovered in my own natal astrology birth chart that, I'm a person maybe meant to talk about death. Um, if you're not familiar with astrology, I have the great benefics, Venus and Jupiter, in the house of death. And it's illuminated by the sign of Leo. And so, really, my thought behind that all is that I'm supposed to bring warmth into these conversations and really, you know, come up with these round table discussions or these campfire discussions about death, dying, grieving, and learning about the afterlife. So I am also a Scorpio. Scorpio rules the eighth house of death and the mysteries of life. And I've never really shied away from these conversations. I've always kind of dove headfirst. And being a water sign, I know that other water signs, being a certified astrologist, being around other water signs, I can pick up on that empathy. And it's really fun because tonight we actually have the grand water trine where Laura, Natalia, and Sara are also water signs. Sara being a Cancer, Natalia being a Scorpio, and Laura being a Pisces. So we do have the grand water trine here tonight, which I think is really, really special. And I think we're going to hear it in all these women's stories tonight as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to first introduce Sara. Sara and I have gotten to know each other through our spouses, and Sara's grace with talking about her mother is just phenomenal. And recently, Sara got married. Well, she's been married, but she actually had a wedding due to putting it off because of, the pandemic. And she was able to honor two loved ones that had passed that could not be at her wedding. This is something that definitely came up last year in the panel. A lot of people were bringing up their stories of, losing a parent and them not being present at like a wedding, and how hard that is to think about. So I wanted to bring Sara on tonight for this panel for the second round of it to tell everybody that there is a way to honor a loved one at a wedding, for instance. And because we're coming up on wedding season, I think it's like the perfect opportunity for her to describe what she did, how she honored her mother, her father-in-law, and also it's a part of her culture. So Sara, I'm going to go ahead and let you have the floor, but thank you so much for joining, and have at it.
Thank you, and thanks for your patience. I wanted to join this call, and if it's a little loud, of course the fire truck will go by right when I begin to talk, but I really appreciate that introduction and everything that you're doing, and I got chills when you were just explaining everything. I would love to explain kind of what I've gone through, kind of like a quick summary, and also share some things that maybe would empower other humans, and try to make them think that it's okay to embrace death. And I know that sounds so morbid sometimes, but what you're saying, and respect the Scorpio in you, it's like, it's true. It's like we have to really know. And something I learned, and I'll start off with, is that recently, and what actually encouraged me to embrace my mom and my father-in-law in the wedding, was when I began really working on myself in counseling. My counselor told me something about death, and was telling me that actually, she asked me, she said, Mother's Day is around the corner. This is when I first said start. And she said, Mother's Day is around the corner. What are you going to do to remember your mom? And I looked at her and I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What am I going to do to remember my mom? Like, I block out that day. That day is very painful to me. And one thing that I think would maybe encourage others that I learned through this whole experience and growing and embracing it, is that we are actually to do something that reminds us of them, or maybe a nostalgic feeling. Like, one thing of my mother was she could cook, and there's only like 2 recipes I really know that or remember of her since I was 5 years old when she passed. So one thing that I started to really empower and be proud of was, no, I'm going to eat something. Maybe I don't cook it, but go to Chinatown or go do things that remind me of her. And whereas before, because I pushed that away, actually when I embraced it, it's like the universe hugged me back, which was really cool. And I think that's actually what then snowballed into what Kenzie was saying of this idea about the wedding. So just to give you a quick summary or background of the Chinese culture with death, is that incense and also the pouring of alcohol, little cups, and fruit kind of by a picture. It's kind of like, I would say, what's the right word? It's like a little altar. And when you enter the home, it's always there. Like when I remember always seeing it. And one thing that you do in remembrance is that when you enter the house, you're supposed to light the incense and bow 3 times. It's just like a respect thing. And kind of thinking of ways, since my husband's father recently passed last year of brain cancer, we were thinking, okay, well, instead of having a chair with an empty picture, which is totally fine. I respect that. I wanted to also embrace culture and kind of tie it together and feel like, okay, growing up, not having her, always feeling absent, of her physically, but spiritually, I did feel her. I probably shouldn't go off track, but there is actually when I was 5 and at her funeral, my sister and I just feel like maybe someone needs to hear this, but my sister and I separated. Just, like I went with the Asian side because we were driving cars afterwards. You know how there's food and stuff after a funeral. Well, my sister had gone with my American side because I'm half, yeah, American, half. My dad's Swedish descent, half Chinese. And so I was with my Chinese brother and we had gone to my mom's actual house, like her actual house the day that of the funeral. And I remember falling asleep on the couch and opening my eyes, like this happened, waking up and literally I see her come down the steps, but she has like this aura of blue. And I'm gonna like, I can feel it, but like across from me was that altar. And I was on the couch it was the altar of my granddad at the time, since she had just passed. And so I see her walk towards me and I was just, opening my eyes and she put her hand near me and just said, "It's all going to be okay." And I looked around and I don't remember anything after that, but to this day, since I was 5 years old, that memory is real. And fast forward to the wedding day and the altar, incorporating something that made me feel the closest to her after she had passed. I honestly didn't think about it until now, but that is honestly something that kind of comes full circle. So, I would encourage anyone who, obviously it's a very hard time, I would encourage you to be very patient with yourself, love yourself, not be afraid of embracing death. I know that's so hard to say. And I think, Kenzie, you do an incredible job of explaining that and also empowering people to be okay with that, because through you and through my counselor, just having that push of like, because it's taboo, right? And having that push of being like, it's okay to embrace it. And once you just like suck it up and just like, embrace that feeling of what you think is grief, I think the total opposite ends up coming towards you. And it's just, honestly, it's a gift. So from that wedding, having that altar, what we did to explain what the actual, I would say, practice that we did was this was right before cake cutting. I actually changed from my traditional white dress to a traditional red Chinese dress. And I wore all my mother's gold and I felt really embraced by her. I still wear every day, like her gold, some of it. And so I really felt embraced. I actually saw my uncle, who I haven't seen in years, and that was her brother, right before we did the tea and the incense ceremony. And when I hugged him, I just started crying. I didn't care about my makeup. I just started crying. And I literally felt like my mom was in that moment. And I think that made that day even better. And then to explain what we did in the practice, we lit the incense. So we had, try to explain visually because I'm a visual learner. So there was kind of like, if you go to Chinese markets or Asian markets, there's sometimes like, you will see like little tea sections, and also you'll see like random, like, they're called flower pots, but it's not like for a floral flower. It's like you put flour in it and that's what you stick the incense into. It's a way to like stick incense into without it falling over. And so we had one of those and just visualize 2 teacups next to that. And then usually fruit is like you're offering up, something nice to eat. Or in Chinese culture, when you bring an orange or fruit to a household, it's like good luck. It's also prosperity. It's lots of good juju. So going back to my story of what we did was we first lit the incense, and my husband's father, we had a photo of him in loving memory, and we had a photo of my mom. And we honestly just bowed 3 times and we put it in together, kind of in unison. And then after that, we poured tea into those little cups. And instead of pouring it, onto the floor, we actually gave it to our living parent. So I gave it to my father, and then my husband gave it to his mother. And so then that kind of tied in the room even more. And I'll be completely honest, I've researched on YouTube and Google all these ways of how to do a tea ceremony. Another thing that I love to share and encourage you all is that, like, just wing it. Like, do what makes you feel good. If you want to embrace your loved one who's not here, and like you have an idea and it's not even traditional, because what we do is kind of like a fusion. And so it's like, just listen to your heart, trust your gut, and just do it. And what I was going to say is, we had an MC, but I told her like 5 minutes before we were about to do this. I'd never told anyone this, but honestly, like, I was just like crazy that day. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was like, I told her, I was like, I need you to introduce this. She's like, what is it? And I was like, it's Chinese tea ceremony, and we're lighting incense for our loved ones. And she's like, Sara. And I'm like, yeah, just do it, please. Thank you. And she crushed it. And she said exactly what I was kind of explaining. She's like, this is in loving memory. Since any loved ones who aren't here, this is a way to also respect culture and just bring in everybody in the room and make everyone feel, loved and accepted and also visible. That's a big thing too, is like for loved ones, sometimes I feel like we don't think that they're there or they're visible, but they really are. And fast forward to a conversation after the wedding, my brother was telling me that basically sometimes, even to this day, if I really am not having the best day, or I really just am feeling at my wit's end or really low, I will call on my mom. I'll be like, Mom, I need you right now. And like, the way that something just works out is beyond me. But on that wedding day, I said to her, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I honestly was raised by my white side, my family, who is really not Chinese at all. I saw my brothers like here and there, but honestly, like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I still wanted to embrace that. So fast forward to encouraging you all, I just really say go for it. Like, don't feel like you have to be ashamed. You can feel sad, of course, but I would say don't let that deter to feeling actually empowered by what death is. And that, like Kenzie said in the beginning, if we were gone, we would want someone to really embrace us and have fun and kind of respect us. So I think that if you have an idea to embrace a loved one, even a pet, a friend, anyone, I hope this encourages you to go through with it. And I hope you feel so much love after you take that step, because it is, it's not easy. And yeah, I feel very thankful to be here and listen to everyone else's story. But I think that kind of sums up of what I did. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Sara. I guess the only thing would be to invite you to call in your mom's and your father-in-law's energy now, and just, repeat or announcing their names. Last year, when people did speak, I kind of let them give background of who died, how they died, if you want to share it, and calling in their energy. And tonight, because it's really nice to know that people that have passed are always with us and they're always accessible. So if you're feeling up to that, I would love for you to do that so we can honor both those people. But what you said, I think, is fantastic. And it sounds like your wedding was actually such a special moment for everybody that maybe didn't even know your mom, because everybody has lost somebody. And that ceremony that you did at your wedding gave an opportunity for people to think about the people that they love that have passed.
Thank you so much for saying that. And that really makes me feel happy, that I took that step, and like it feels like that was worth the doubts, the fear of what if I just like ruin this. And yes, I will definitely embrace what you're saying. So my mother came from Hong Kong. She was from a very, very, very poor country. I used to be very ashamed of how she died, but now I actually through talking to Kenzie and embracing that it's okay. Like culture is huge, like someone can be, we are our surroundings. We're also a product of our environment. And if someone is telling you something your whole life, you're going to believe that. So that's just kind of like a preface of what I'm about to say, is that my mother came from a very abusive, a very poor country and family. And so I think she was a child bride. So that's why I was mentioning before, I have two brothers. I'm super close with them. I don't call them half brothers. They are my brothers. But with that being said, she had them at 16 and 17. And then she came over to America from that first marriage. And here she worked her butt off. She had 3 jobs. She was a really hard worker. Everyone loved her. She had such a presence, but she was also one of those people, and I'm sure like many of you can relate, very hard on herself, because I think she didn't want to be a product of her surroundings, and she wanted to really be different and be a mom to us that she didn't have. So with that being said, she had really bad depression. I think fast forward to the week that she had passed away, she went through really bad depression, and I don't think she had actually refilled her prescription. I think it kind of was along those ways or those lines. And basically from that, she I think had an episode and decided to take a bunch of Benadryl. I feel so strong saying this now, because I'll be honest, like I couldn't even say that to you without having tears on my face, sometimes just crying and feeling like, I don't know, embarrassment, because people would feel, maybe that I was a product of that. But with that being said, she did, I remember my dad telling me that she did actually leave a voice message to her kids, telling them that she loved us very much, that she was so proud of us, that she did everything in her being. And I think she just had such a hard life that she thought that lie, that she was better off, or we were better off without her. And, if anyone's out there that ever had that thought, I just encourage you to really just know that you're loved and that is not the way out. Yes, I have grown so much from this experience, but I would do anything in the world to have her back. So, yeah, I just think so. That's how she had passed away. And my father-in-law had brain cancer, but it was so sudden. That was really a shocker, because he originally actually, he was a surgeon. He was very healthy. He ran marathons. And so it was a sudden shock that he had passed away. And then what had happened was, we knew about a year before. So this is like 2020, we found out he had brain cancer, but he was like really keeping control of it. And then they did give him 6 to 13 months to live. I think he kind of got closer to the 13-month side, which was amazing. We did, in the end, go back to France. That's where he's from. And we embraced him. And one beautiful thing that I'll share is that might help other people too. And I have chills talking about it, because my husband didn't come from a family that told the kids that they love them. And I remember my husband telling me the week that his dad had passed, he went up to his dad. I actually had pictures on my phone because I was sitting in the living room and his dad was in a wheelchair. And all of a sudden, he just goes over to his dad, and I just get chills. And I don't know, I just start snapping pictures because I knew that maybe in the future he would love to have that moment. And basically, he just hugged his dad in the wheelchair. And his dad was kind of lifeless at that point. You know, he couldn't move his mouth, he could kind of lift his hands, but the brain tumor had taken over so much at that point that for a family being super French, super non-affectionate, for him to do that, I think broke so many curses, broke so many stigmas, and brought love in that room, in that moment. And later on that week, he had talked to his dad and was like, you know, you never told me that you love me, and I want you to say it to me. And I want to tell you I love you. And that's just another moment. I think if anyone's going out there, maybe if someone's, you know, sick, or, you know, I think anger is one thing that, you know, we're so used to in life. But if you really do have that feeling that you love someone, no matter what they did wrong to you, I encourage you just to share that love, because I know it wasn't easy for Etienne, my husband. His whole entire childhood, he never was told that he was loved. He was raised by, you know, someone else basically, because both of his parents worked so much. And for him to do that, even though they never did that and extended their hand first as a parent, was really powerful. And so for him then to, you know, embrace and respect his parents, his dad in the remembrance, I think that was really beautiful. So I'm going to mute myself. Sorry it's so loud, but thank you for letting me share that.
You're welcome. All right. That was all really great. And I'm happy that you were able to like go into like the specifics. I think just hearing another person experience, you know, some of these types of deaths, the different like ways, I think it's really helpful for people to hear. And you're actually going to hear from another person tonight that is I don't know the term. I'm not a death expert. I call myself a death positive person, but a survivor from suicide. So like somebody that has survived suicide through a loved one, basically. And Laura will probably help me when she gets the chance to speak. But we're gonna go ahead and move to Natalia. Natalia is a roommate of mine, and I'll never forget when I first met her. She explained to me what she did for a living, and I was just totally enthralled by it and very like interested in what she does. She works at NYU. She's a death researcher, and she actually gave me a book last year when I was creating the course It's Not Really Over, and it's about what happens when we die. And recently they had a documentary that was released, and she invited me to the showing. It was virtual, and it was really phenomenal to just listen and just like soak in the information. So, Natalia, the Scorpio of tonight, the other Scorpio of tonight, I'm going to go ahead and let you have the floor.
Hi. Thanks for the introduction, Kenzie, and thank you so much, Sara, for sharing. I'm going to approach this maybe a little bit differently, just given that I'm coming from a more medical scientific background. So like you mentioned, I study death, and in the hospital, we call that cardiac arrest, meaning that your heart has stopped beating, you're no longer breathing, as well as resuscitation research. So trying to find ways to bring more people back after they have crossed this threshold of death. And the way we look at it really is that death is an extension of life. It's not a stark black and white, one day you're alive and the next moment you're dead. We really see it as sort of a continuum. And that's because of all of the testimonials and stories that we've heard from people who have been resuscitated back, and the experiences that they had while they were physically dead. And I guess just a little background of like how I came to do that is maybe it's the triple Scorpio in my chart, but death and consciousness and, spirituality is something I've always been interested in. And prior to where I'm working now, I worked with ALS patients for a number of years. And just for people who may not know, ALS is a neurodegenerative disorder that progresses very quickly. You lose the ability to speak, to move, and eventually you lose the ability to breathe. And that's how the majority of these patients die. And I was there for a number of years, and I started working there when I was 24. So I was like super young, and it was a really profound experience. Just because I was, witnessing how these different people and how their families were approaching this diagnosis, a very scary diagnosis to get. And I felt like, unfortunately, in the medical community, because people become so desensitized, that the doctors were really insensitive towards the, emotional and psychological, issues that people were dealing with. And because I'm not a doctor, I really felt like it was kind of my job to kind of be a companion for these people and listen to their stories and let them talk about their fears, because often their families were in denial and they wouldn't talk about it. And it's kind of felt like they were forgotten about. And that's something that's just ever present in our society, the way we, treat the elderly. We put them in nursing homes. We want to get them as far away from us as possible because, like you mentioned, there is such a taboo around death. We don't want to be confronted with our own, mortality. And something that I noticed was that we had a lot of Hasidic Jewish patients. And, they obviously have very strong faith, and they have really a huge support network. And I just happened to notice that these patients kind of fared better than some of our other patients. And once I left there, I really wanted to find a way for everybody to kind of approach death in this sort of, not to minimize what they were going through, but I felt like they were more peaceful and serene about, what was going on with them, what was going on with their loved one. And I do think it was because like they had this idea that, to circle back to the name of this whole panel, that it's not really over. And so that kind of brought me to where I'm working now. And like I had mentioned, there have been lots of people that I've heard from who have had these, what most people will call near-death experiences. We're called experiences of death, because we just want to make clear that like these people have died. This wasn't like they nearly died. Like we've had people who were dead for hours and we're able to bring them back. And it's really amazing that they all kind of had this very lucid, conscious experience, and the narrative is always the same. They have a review of every single moment in their life, no matter how small or how, large it was in the moment. They were able to kind of see how, almost from a third party perspective, how their behaviors and intentions and actions kind of rippled through the lives of everyone. And so they were kind of able to see this whole interconnectedness that we all share. And they all describe it as a very peaceful, loving, warm state of being. And something that I remember that one of our patients said to me was that she knew she had died, but she never felt like there was a moment where she was alive and then dead. She felt like she was alive and then more alive, that she was conscious and then more conscious. And, there's in this process of dying, they had access to all of the reality of their lives. And it's very humbling because they always, come back with a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed sense of empathy and compassion for others. They no longer fear death. I always think about when I first started working with one of the particular doctors, he said to me very kind of off, like casually, he was like, I think death is a very pleasant experience, actually. And it, they always come back, and it's, they kind of always show us that all of the, mental energy that we put into our day-to-day lives, all of the stress, all of the quarrels, all of this noise, doesn't really matter. And that at the end of the day, what really matters is how we cultivate our humanity and how we treat other people. And I think that's very beautiful. I think that, when you hear that, it really helps us become more compassionate in ourselves and kind of like think more critically about how we're living our lives and how we're treating other people. And I wasn't going to really talk about this experience, but 2 years ago, I lost my grandmother, and she was someone very, very important in my life. She lived with me my entire life. And when she passed, unfortunately, there was huge strife in my family afterwards. And I previously came from a very, very large extended family, and everyone kind of like broke apart. There was a lot of fighting. And it really made it difficult to mourn her because of that. I think I wanted to, be there for my mother in particular, and be there for the family members that I could be there for. And it was sad, obviously losing her, but I think what was even, kind of what was distracting me was how her memory was being, I don't know, used for people's own like personal material gains. There was a lot of issues with like inheritance and like things of that nature. And I think what brought me some peace was hearing about these people's experiences, and hearing about how death is peaceful. And it can sound scary when people talk about having this life review and like judging themselves for, maybe how they may have harmed other people or hurt other people. But everyone always says that it was a very positive experience. And a lot of people will talk about it in religious terms, saying that they felt like the warm light of God. But even in people who are not religious, like those are all things that they talk about experiencing. And so I think, it helps to bring some peace of mind, knowing that, as cliche as it sounds, that kind of their souls are at rest and that they found some sort of peace. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I can go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that I could talk about. It's maybe a little bit more sciencey, so I don't know if we want to go there, but
I mean, this is really great to have you because the main reason I wanted you to come on, Natalia, is I think you have such an ease talking about death, but also for the people that listen um, to the replay and are maybe a little hesitant to accept that there is life after death, having somebody that works in a science background and has like back data with people that have, returned from death explaining this experience. I think it helps people realize that, it's not really over, that the soul might live on, or however you want to view it, but that, there is an opportunity to be reunited with people that you once knew, or to live in more of a beautiful space actually than here.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, talking about like reuniting, I guess, with loved ones, a very common theme that comes up in people who've had these experiences, is that they often do speak with loved ones who have passed on before them. And a lot of them talk about being faced with the choice and kind of being told by, their ancestors, loved ones that they lost in the past, like that they need to go back. And I think that's very beautiful. I definitely I have a photo of my grandmother right next to me that I'm looking at right now. And whenever I do feel like I need some sort of support or going through a really low moment, just how she was when she was, physically in my life, I feel like I still get that support from her now, just to kind of keep going, and just getting some sort of reassurance and encouragement from her that all these, small things that are so important to us right now that seem like disasters are really not important, and that these kind of fundamental things that we get taught as children are really, are such cliches now as adults, are really what brings purpose to life.
Well, thank you so much. And I love that you have a picture of your grandma. In my course, there's a module where I definitely tell people to put pictures out of their loved ones. And I know that, you're coming from a background, Hispanic background, half Puerto Rican, and I'm sure that's really alive and well in your family. The culture to put pictures out of loved ones, kind of like with Sara, like in the Chinese culture, having an altar. So I love that you're doing that. And yeah, I mean, thank you. That was really great,
Yeah.
really well spoken. And Sara and you have done great. And we're going to move on to our third guest. It's Laura. Laura and I work together at Cafe Mogador. Cafe Mogador brings together really special people, I feel like. But Laura and I have really bonded over feeling signs from the other side. Um, just really quickly to kind of speak about the creative asset of this panel. The creative asset that I use are all pictures that I took the night that I found out that my nephew passed. Obviously, I never met my nephew Fitz. I was here in New York while he was born in St. Louis, and it was clearly impossible for me to go back to even be there. And plus, he only lived 1 hour. But after I found out that he died, obviously I was in shock. So I decided to just try to get outside, and the fastest way I could get outside was to go on my rooftop in East Village. And it was probably one of the most awe-inspiring sunsets I've ever seen in my entire life. The sky went from yellow to orange to pink to blue. It was just really crazy to see all these different colors happening at one time. And there was a little sliver of the moon there. And in that moment, I just kind of felt like he was giving me a sign that everything was okay, and that some of the things that I had been thinking about prior to him dying, because we knew that he would die, was that he would be reunited with people that I once loved that were in my life before him, my grandparents. And like Natalia, I have pictures of my grandparents in my room. So when I met Laura and I heard her story about her mother, and the one story in particular that she's going to share tonight, I knew she had to be here and to speak. And Laura is a very creative person. She's an artist, and I think you'll hear that in her storytelling. So Laura, you have the floor. Thank you so much for being here, Miss Pisces.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I'm very, very excited. Yeah, so just I'm a pretty spiritual person, I've got to say, at this point, but I am in my mid 40s, and I have gotten here through a long process of non-belief or disbelief, and then which turned into belief later on. But my mother crossed over to the other side, which you'll hear me refer to it as, because I do believe there's something else beyond this for sure, with like this absolute certainty, as I'll explain. But when she crossed over, I was 19, she was 50. So in 5 years, I'll be the same age she was when she decided to take her life. She was depressed and alcoholic my whole life for as long as I could remember, pretty much. At least I think I started to notice that when I was around 7 or 8, and then it just got progressively worse as I got older. And depression is like another form of cancer. Sometimes you just see it kind of eat somebody from the inside out. Alcoholism was the way she treated her depression, and we tried to seek help for her for a long time, making, at that time, this is in the 90s, it was like there wasn't a ton of information out there about how to help somebody, and our mental health system was not very supportive. Her family was not supportive. Her family was very abusive, similar to Sara's story, it sounds like, with her mother. But it was quite sad, to see it all happen. And I was there trying to be her support as much as possible. And of course, this is when I was a teenager. I was trying to like basically mother my mom and help her change her mind, or give her reasons to, quit drinking and join the world. It was always a very like a life coachy kind of thing that I was doing with my mom, even though I barely understood how the world worked. But that was kind of how I lived. And she finally decided to commit suicide. I was in college. It was my freshman year, and it was late April. So the anniversary is April 23rd. She did it after my dad decided it was time for a divorce. We had all like tried to get her to go into rehabilitation or therapy or go on antidepressants. There was so many things that we tried, but she'd always go back to drinking, and she was abusive at times, like verbally abusive with us. So we got tired of it. It was really hard to like live with that every day. And my mom, I know, tried to break from her past experiences, but she couldn't figure it out. And so when my father filed for divorce, it was like that was it for her. She just didn't know a way out or a way beyond that. So she had committed suicide by hanging, and I found out during final season of my freshman year, and I remember feeling like it punched me in the gut and like knocked my knees out from under me. I collapsed and I started screaming so loud. I think the whole campus heard me that day, but I didn't realize it. Like I lost all sense of my self-awareness and consciousness, and it was something else. But anyway, my first reaction afterwards was feeling like I think I was expecting this Hollywood experience after death, of like seeing her ghost walk down the hallway of my college, or going home and having her come to me in dreams. And it was weird because I had these premonition dreams of something really terrible happening before she did it, like you know, really bizarre, like dreams of demons ripping my heart out of my chest and stuff, like weird. And when it happened, it did feel like something like that. It was pretty shocking to find that out. But I was so sad, and so my grief process was all over the place. The extreme sadness of just longing for her to be back, just wishing that this wasn't true. It was like, am I going to wake up from this crazy nightmare? That was my first reaction, was like, this can't be real. This just can't be real. She can't be gone. Like, where? I'm never going to hear her voice again on the phone. I'm never going to like get to hold her or hug her again. Like the physicality is gone. And it was such a shock. And then I think that after a period of time, I got angry that I felt abandoned. Like she decided not to stick around, to be with me, to watch me grow, to be there for whatever life events might happen, you know, going down the line. So a lot of my anger was self-directed as well. Like, why couldn't I keep her here? Like, what if I had said this, or what if I had done that? And I think some of my self-directed anger was against my own spirituality. I was just like, I was raised Presbyterian in this religious kind of way, so that, you know, there's this big God in the sky that, you know, is like a father to you and directs you in all the things you do. But I just gave it all up. I thought, like, this is ridiculous. And I remember the reverend of my church, my mom had been very specific in her note about how she wanted to, like, you know, have her funeral service. The reverend of the church that she went to, that she had requested to be buried in, was just venting to us how angry he was at her for choosing to do this selfish thing. And I remember thinking how much that response lacked empathy or any kind of feeling. And I think that kind of inspired me to move away from that sort of spirituality. And so for a while, I had very little spirituality in my life whatsoever. I kind of believed that a spirit was kind of like energy that transferred from one living being to another thing. So it's like it just leaves your body and starts, you blow like wind through the tree leaves, and, you know, you revitalize the soil and you bring new life in that way. But I didn't really believe, I thought it was egotistical for people to think there was a spirit that existed beyond their bodies. I was like, of course only humans would think that, you know, like we can't get enough of ourselves. But that all kind of changed and turned on its head when one day I was living in this artistic loft building in Greenpoint. And down the hall from me was this musician, a Scorpio, of course. And she was fantastic. She's very, very talented singer. And she's just always got that, like, she just is always getting in trouble. You know, she knows how to like find something interesting to do. So one night I go down the hallway to meet her, and I think we're sharing a glass of wine. And she's like, so, do you want to do something interesting? Like, do you want to have a New York experience tonight? I'm like, yeah, like a New York experience. Why wouldn't I want to have a New York experience? What are you thinking about? And she's like, well, there's this séance that we could go to. It's I think it's going to be really weird, really like a real trip. I was like, a séance, huh? A New York séance. I'm like, sure, sign me up. Like, I was imagining like tie-dyed t-shirts and people with crystals around their necks, and like, just, I don't know, like Kumbayaville or something, you know, like, oh wow, this is going to be real. Like, I'm going to have stories for days, you know, this is going to be great. So we went to this spirituality church or something that's on 7th Avenue. And we went up this elevator onto a floor. When the doors opened, there was this glass case I remember in front of me, and it had all these little tchotchkes, like little like statues and things behind this glass thing. Like it almost looked like a large medicine cabinet with all these tchotchkes. And I was like, what is this place? Like it was just so bizarre. It was like some weird office building, but not, you know. And we go to this room, and the shades are already drawn down, and there's a table in the middle, and they've got that big silver horn thing, which I think they made out of cardboard with tinfoil wrapped around it. And you know, they have chairs in a circle, and there's just rather normal looking people sitting there. And my friend Jennifer and I were very careful not to talk too much about like, oh, I wonder if we're going to contact the people on the other side that we know, and like then list them off as we sit down. You know, we were like, there was these 2 self-proclaimed psychics there, and we're going to put them to the test, you know, like there's no way. So we were pretty much like, you know, just sitting there watching, being like, when's the weird stuff going to happen, you know, like where's the story fodder, come on, give it to us. And so they get started, and they take us through this meditation where we had to imagine this like ball of energy kind of travel through our bodies. And then we opened our eyes, and we're sitting there, and these 2 women that were the self-proclaimed psychics started looking around the room and saying, oh yeah, do you see that guy over there? They'd always be in this conversation with each other. Be like, yeah, I see somebody standing behind you. And they'd point to some random guy in the circle, and they'd be like, yeah, he's got like a beard, and he's just standing, like he's showing us a picture of something here and there. And you know, it didn't seem relevant in any way, because like I didn't know any of those people there. And the people were all like, yeah, I guess, yeah, sure. So I'm like, oh boy, not only is this New York experience kind of like, it's not really doing much for me whatsoever. It's like, this is very dull. Like, how long is this going to go on? Like, they're going to guess at people's like passed on loved ones for a while. Is that what we're doing? And so at some point they look at my friend Jennifer, who's sitting to my right, and the one psychic kind of startles back, and she's like, oh my God, I see a transfiguration. Do you see that? To the other psychic. And the other psychic looks at my friend Jennifer, and she's like, oh yeah, I see it. I definitely see that. And I'm like, what? And I look over at my friend Jennifer, and she looks normal. You know, there's nothing, I don't see anything going on. It's kind of a dark room, but I'm like, this seems fine. But then she starts describing this character that she's like, transfiguration is when the spirit is sitting in the body. It comes to visit you, and it sits in that person's body, and we can then see the features of that passed on person through the person sitting in front of us. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So she starts describing this older woman. She asked Jennifer if there was a woman that she knew that passed on, that was like from her mother's side. And basically they nailed that it was her grandmother right away. And they described that she had cataracts in her left eye, that she had arthritis in her hands. They described the kind of apron she would always wear when she cooked. And I look over at my friend, and I'm like, she's got a tear going down her eye. And I'm like, oh, wow, something's happening. This is like nailing something here. And then they look at me. So they tell Jennifer, they're like, well, your grandmother's with you. She's visiting you. She's here to tell you that she's always with you, and she still loves you, and she's never that's never going to stop. And now my friend is like basically bawling, and I'm like, oh fuck, what's going on next? Like, this is really getting weird. Like, this isn't like the fun weird, this is like intense weird, like whoa. And so I didn't really know how to respond. I hadn't talked to her about her grandmother and what her grandmother looked like, but they moved to me next. And then they're like, oh my God, it's a theme tonight, another transfiguration. And I was like, I feel myself be like, oh yeah, let's see what you got. You're not going to get this one. No way. You're going to make up some shit about my grandma or something. Like, it will be like that. And then they're looking at me, and they're like, this person's is younger. It's another woman, but younger. And I feel this like sadness, this intense sadness. Is your mother on the other side? And this is just all they're just putting all of this out there. I'm not prompting them in any way. I'm just sitting there kind of like a deer in headlights at this point, like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, she is. Hold on one second. My roommate is singing really loud and I just want to ask him to be quiet. Hold on. Hey, Richard, I'm doing a little interview that's being recorded. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So I was like, okay, they know my mom's passed over to the other side. And then they're like, yeah, and I'm sensing this sadness. And was she depressed? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, did she take her life? And I was like, yeah, she did. And now I'm like, how the fuck do they know this? You know, I'm like, is there something like, I'm like trying to scientifically break this down. Like, I'm like not convinced that there's any way that these two psychics could like come in and know all this stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, she did. She died by suicide. And they were like, well, she's here and she's behind you and she's pacing back and forth and she just keeps apologizing again and again and again. She just keeps saying how sorry she is, how sorry she is, how sorry she is. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, and she's trying to show us a picture of another younger woman. Do you have a younger sister? And my sister was actually and I said, yeah, I do. And they're like, she wants you to tell your sister how sorry she is. And please tell her that she felt like she had no other choice. And that was the only thing she felt like she knew she could do. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know what else to say. I was just blown away because this was that, like, I guess, proof that my mother's spirit was somehow still around, that there was still this thing that was left over and that she was there. So yeah, I was very blown away by that, to say the least. It was like one of the most profound experiences I'd had for a while. And the two of us walk out of that séance and like look at each other with these like wide eyes while we're basically just speechless, like stumbling over our words, almost like I am now, but very shocked. And I think that put me on a path of finding and believing in more spirituality for sure. I've since like, you know, I've done all sorts of things, but one of them is an ayahuasca ceremony at one point, and I found that during that ceremony I had like almost this, you don't die by any means. I mean, most people don't die, but I've heard there's some bad experiences out there for some people, but I definitely saw something beyond where we are now. And I got this perspective of life being this series of lessons. Like, this is a giant high school that you're in, and you're here to learn things. And a lot of the things that you're supposed to learn is how to lose things. And the losing of things helps you understand how much you need to appreciate the things that you have in front of you, like Sara was saying before. And it just gives you this whole perspective. For me specifically, since my mother passed by suicide, I became a very huge advocate of being a light in darkness. So always finding, I'm never afraid to talk about my experiences because I don't want there to be anyone else feeling like they shouldn't talk about them. And I don't want to have any shame surrounding suicide. I think that it's a very serious disease almost. It's like the end result of a disease. And I think that, you know, when people hear about it, I always hope that it inspires them to find new things to learn in this life, that like when you think you're at the end of your rope, there's something else that life can surprise you with, you know, if you open your heart to it. And opening your heart to it is the biggest challenge, right? It's like the thing to always find is just like let whatever lessons life has for you in, and the hard ones are sometimes the best ones. They tumble you around a lot, but they end up giving you the most profound amount of empathy that I think I don't know if you can experience it have it any other way, you know, just to have that feeling of how much you appreciate the things around you, and how much I appreciate every little thing in my day, you know, like the birds chirping and the wind and the leaves. They kind of are all like little spirits around me. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's pretty much sums it up for me.
Yes, that was great. And you're such a funny storyteller. Like I was laughing because of just your personality when you'd explain. I really felt like I was a fly on the wall that night. But yeah, I mean, also I really liked how you spoke about the stages of grief in the course. I do talk about that, and how, you know, you might go from one stage like shock to anger to sadness, but it's important to educate yourself on that just so you don't get lost. Um, you know, sometimes I've read that spirits will come through technology, and so when you were speaking, I we lost connection during one part over here at my apartment. Um, but I think, I don't know, maybe she was present then. She's trying to show that she's present, but it was basically when you were describing that your sister was the one that found her. That's when it cut out for me. But
Mm.
that was the picture that was being shown during the séance of a younger girl than you and your mother. So I just wanted to repeat that in case the recording didn't pick that up, because that is such a I think that's such a pivotal part of your story, and showing that how specific this was to you, and how these psychic mediums, how would they know anything like that. um, and I totally agree with you, and I've read many books to prepare for this course. um, and I'll give a personal antidote really quickly. Another sign from the other side for me was, you know, after Fitz died, I was super curious about death and I wanted to start learning about it. And this was before I put the course out. And so I decided to pick up a book that my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was reading when his wife, my maternal grandmother, was dying. And he was always telling her, Beverly, look for the light. And he's like 80 years old, telling his 80-year-old wife when she's like in hospice, Beverly, make sure you look for the light. And so we would all kind of find it at that age kind of strange. But when I started to read these Sylvia Brown books that he had a hold of, she's a Kansas City native, and my grandfather and grandmother are from Kansas City, Missouri, too. That was something that was in the books. And another thing that was in the books was that, you know, you're meant to come on to earth to learn lessons and in astrology we talk a lot about, esoterically we talk about how, you know, your north node is there because you want to advance your soul, like you want to learn new skills, like you want to put yourself out of your comfort zone. And you know, the hard times are meant to really teach you and build that character. So I agree with everything you're saying about it being a high school. I've read it in these Sylvia Brown books. But just another sign of, you know, I've never really actually talked with the psychic medium, but I've had a lot of signs just personally between the person that has passed and, you know, me going about my day. And so after I finished the first Sylvia Brown book, I was walking dogs. That was one of my part-time jobs at the moment. I was walking dogs in the West Village, and I happened to come across a stack of books, and none of them really caught my attention, but I told myself I'm going to pick these up because my grandpa Jack would do this. So I put them in my backpack and I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I mean, I don't need these books. I don't want to, none of them I really want to read, but I'm going to do it. So I started to walk to the second dog. And as I'm walking to the second dog, I see pretty far away another stack of books. And before I approach the books, I tell myself, if I go up to the books and there's a Sylvia Brown book there, I know that it's him communicating with me. I've invited his presence into my day. I've really thought about picking up these last stack of books, and if this stack of books has Sylvia Brown books in it, I know that he's here with me. And when I went up to the stack, there was 2 Sylvia Brown books in the stack of books. There was 3 books. One was a Spanish dictionary, and the other 2 were Sylvia Brown books that I've used to incorporate into my course. So that, for me, I've had many, many experiences. And so when Laura shared her story about the séance, it not only made me feel like I want to go to a séance in New York as well, but also just, it's so amazing to speak with other people that have had signs from the other side or after somebody has crossed. So this pretty much wraps up the panel. I do want to say that this is in honor of not only Fitz, obviously, but my 4 grandparents. It's inspired by them as well. And also today I got news that my godmother had passed away. She lived a long, beautiful life, well into her 90s. But I want to bring her presence in today because I know that she's actually probably living a better life now. That's my belief. But obviously it doesn't take away, the sadness that she has left us here on the physical realm. So Laura, Natalia, Sara, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. And I think that the last thing I'll say is keep being a light in the darkness, especially about death. That's the aesthetic of this course. I'm wearing all white when we're talking about a taboo topic that's really dark and dreary. And when we go to funerals, we wear black. But if you're a light in darkness, it really will help another person. So thank you for doing this for not only yourself, for the loved ones that have passed, but for the people that are going to listen back.
Thank you, Kenzie.
Thank you. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you, Kenzie. You too.
Bye.
Bye.